This morning, we're continuing our study into the look at David. And, you know, we talked a few weeks ago about how God chooses and how God goes about choosing people to do certain things in his kingdom. And this morning, we're going to talk about how God, after he chooses people, how he begins to build them, how he begins to mold them, and how he begins to make them. And I know with all of us, that scenario probably looks just a little bit different. If you and I were to start building a doghouse, there's probably 10 different ways we would go about it. Some of us would cut it piece by piece, one at a time. Some of us would take a pattern and lay it out and have all of our pieces cut before we started putting it together. Some of us wouldn't worry about it being square because it's just a dog. Some of us who are OCD and other words would want to make sure it was in a 16th of an inch, right? All of us would choose to build differently. But none of us chooses to build what he's doing. He knows exactly the outcome that he's looking for. He knows exactly the plan that he has for each and every person and the process that he is going to use to build them. He chose David to be the incoming, if you will, king of Israel. But there was a time, as we'll see here in 1 Samuel 16, starting in verse number 14, there's kind of a transition period. Boy, and he still, although he was chosen by God, he still had a lot of things that he had to learn before he could actually. So in verse number 14 it says, "But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy player on a harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. I have seen of Jesse seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in play, or prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, Send me David, thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul, and he stood there before him. And he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp, played with his hands, so Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. So God was beginning to build David. He was beginning to construct David into the person that he knew David would need to be to serve as the king of Israel. Now, when God builds, there's several things that he can use. God can use anything he wants to build us, right? And I believe one of the things that I see here in the life of David that God used was seclusion. Because remember now, as soon as God appointed David as the one who would be the king of Israel, we saw a couple weeks ago, what did David do? Miss Tammy? He went back to tending his sheep. He didn't hang around the crowds. He didn't hang around the city. he went back to doing his job. And we talked about when you're a shepherd, you're out there all alone, right? You're by yourself. It's just you and those dirty, nasty, filthy, stinky animals. So God, I believe, is using, first of all, as he's building David, the tool of seclusion. Now you say, well, why would God do that? I want to tell you, some of us just need to learn to be alone with God. There we go. Some of us just need to learn how to be alone with God. And there were times when David was out there tending sheep that he was away from the distractions. He was away from the noisiness of the world. He was out there where he could hear the voice of God. He could commune with God. It was in those lonely, vast fields where he could just sit down, put his sheep to the bed, and learn and hear and listen with his Lord. And he could feel peace within himself. You see, I believe with all my heart that solitude, that quiet time alone with God is vital for our spirituality. I believe it's vital for our walk with the Lord Jesus Christ. If it wasn't, Jesus Christ himself wouldn't have sought time alone with his Father. Throughout the New Testament, we see time after time after time where Jesus wanted to get by himself. He wanted to get away from the throngs of people. He wanted to get away from the sites where miracles were taking place. He wanted to get to himself and be alone with his God. As a matter of fact, Mark 1:35 says, "And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he, Jesus Christ, went out and departed into a solitary place and there prayed." Luke 6:12 says, "And it came to pass in those days that Jesus Christ, went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God." Let me tell you, folks, if the very Son of God saw the value and the need, the benefit of being alone with God, how much more do we need to be alone with the Father? You see, a lot of times we look and we fear times of solitude. We fear times of seclusion when we should embrace them. A lot of times we say, well, I don't want to be by myself. I don't want to be all alone. But if you are a born-again, saved child of God, even when you are by yourself, you are never alone. You are in the presence of the Father. A perfect time to pray. A perfect time to listen to what the Spirit of God has to say for us. And I believe that in those times out in those fields, God was building, God was communicating, God was shaping David into what he would have him to be. Sometimes we just need to leave the hustle and the bustle behind. Sometimes we just need to go into that quiet closet of prayer, that quiet place of communication with God. So we see as God is building David, he uses seclusion and solitude. But a lot of us wouldn't think of this, but God also uses routine. Now, most of us are in a routine, right? We get up at the same time. We go through the same steps each and every day. We know what time we're going to eat breakfast. We know what time we're going to eat lunch. We know what time we're going to eat supper. We know what time we're going to do all those things in between, right? Everything is a schedule. Everything is a routine. And a lot of times we think that's bad. But I want to tell you, I believe God was looking at David's routine, and he was saying, if this man is faithful to a routine, if he is faithful to something that is monotonous, that he's doing over and over and over and over again, if he is faithful to that, if he is not wavering from that, if he is not wanting to go out and do his own thing, then he'll be faithful to whatever I call him to do. Can you imagine day after day walking sheep, feeding sheep, bedding sheep, sleeping beside sheep? You get up the next morning, what do? Walk the sheep, feed the sheep, smell like a sheep. You bed down like a sheep. The next day, guess what? You get up, you feed the sheep, you walk the sheep, you lay down beside the sheep. And we think, well, how could God use that? How could God use that day after day, doing the same routine to build us? Well, look at verse 11. Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, send me David thy son, which is with thy sheep. So we know he was there. We know he was doing his best in the routine of everyday life. But you know what? You learn faithfulness, don't you? You see, those sheep knew of David's faithfulness, right? They knew that every day David was going to be faithful to what? Feed them. He was going to be faithful to move them. He was going to be faithful to tend them. He was going to be faithful to put them to bed. He was going to be faithful to lay right there beside them and protect them. And in that faithfulness, God knew that if this man would be faithful to a bunch of dirty, nasty, smelly sheep, that he would be faithful to serve God as the king of Israel. So a routine is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes God allows us to have those little routine, monotonous times to see if we'll be faithful during those times. I read a quote years ago, and I wrote it down, from Billy Graham, and it said, when life seems like drudgery, just keep walking. God is preparing you for greater things. So when it seems monotonous, when it seems routine, just do it. Just keep being faithful. Because God is getting ready to do something. He is building you. He is molding you just like he was King David. As long as we're praying, as long as we're working, as long as we'll keep living for him, God will bless us. God will reward us. And that's what he was trying to show through the life of David this morning. You be faithful being a shepherd. And when I called you in to serve King Saul to play the harp when he needs it, when that evil spirit falls upon him and he needs you to play the harp, you play the harp. You don't ask no questions. You don't do anything else. If he commands you to play the harp, you play the harp, and you be faithful and you be good at it. The same can be true of you in here, you and I in the church. When God calls you to do something, be faithful. Be willing to do it. Each and every time God calls upon you to do it. Don't tell me, oh, God, preacher, this is boring. This is boring. I'm teaching Sunday school every week. It's boring. Think about the people that you're reaching. Think about the message that you're teaching. God's going to use that. You don't know how I do something greater, just like he was with David. But not only does he use seclusion and solitude, not only does he use times of routine and monotony, times of adversity. Everything's not going to be smooth. Everything's not going to be sprinkles and rainbows. When you join the Christian life, it is not a walk of pleasure. It is a war. It is a battle. And we know that David encountered some adversity in his life. You think about over in 1 Samuel 17 when this young boy encountered a lion and a bear. But more than that, you think about as he walks into a valley all alone by himself and he kills a giant named Goliath. Now all these things were preparing him to be the king of Israel. Even later on, as he's hated and pursued by King Saul. All these things God was using, even his own family. His dad didn't even think him good enough to be the next king. Didn't even call him in, if you remember, for the lineup. Oh, he's just a dumb shepherd boy. He won't do. But God saw something different. He saw through that adversity. And a lot of times when we get into a routine, when we get into monotony, God will send times of adversity. God will allow times of adversity come in, not for the purpose to hurt us, but to grow us, to make us better. It's in those times of adversity that God teaches us. He teaches us patience. He teaches us faith and dependence on Him. He teaches us to follow His plan, right? I mentioned dog houses earlier. Have I ever told y'all about my dog house building? I never told y'all about my business. Oh man, it was wonderful. Okay, my dad used to wire houses years and years ago for Mr. Pete Ivy as he built houses, and I'd tag along everywhere my dad went, and I'd notice these big old piles of scrap wood, scrap lumber, and I told Daddy, I said, I believe, I was always hustler, I sold rocks when I was little. I set up a table in our yard, and so I ain't talking about arrowheads, I'm talking about gravel, okay? I sold gravel. Preacher Crocker bought 3 pieces of gravel and kept them on him. When he passed away in Glendale, South Carolina, up there years ago, he had 3 pieces of gravel in a dish on his mantle that he bought from me, 3 pieces of gravel. So I said, well, I believe I can make some money here building dog houses. Well, I'd get me some old pieces of wood, and Mr. Pete would come out there and he'd say, well, here's what you need to do. Here's how you need to put it together, where it'll be sturdy, where it'll be square. And I said, oh, I believe I got this. So as we get home in the evenings, I'd take these big old piles of wood, and I'd get me a hammer and a nail. And, man, I'd work on that thing. And about a week later, I had a dog house. A dog house. And Mr. Pete came by our house down there on Happy Valley Road one day, and he was talking with Daddy about some jobs they had coming up. And he looked out through there and he said, what is that? And I was proud. I run out there and said, Mr. Pete, that's the dog house that I built. He said, whose dog is going to sleep in that? Mr. Pete wasn't real confident that my dog house would even withstand a dog. And I got to thinking, he threw some adversity at me. I've got to do better. I thought it was a masterpiece. He looked at it and saw it as a bunch of nails and wood that probably wasn't as pretty as they was when they was in the pile. But you know what? It challenged me even as a kid, and I remember that to this day. When I'm putting something together, when I'm building something, I try to make sure it's true. I try to make sure it's square, because I had someone question my building techniques years and years ago. But you see, God allowed me in that point as a child to walk through that place to learn. He did the same thing with David. He allowed David to face that lion and bear. He allowed David to enter into that valley and face that giant Goliath. He allowed him to be pursued and hated by Saul and even some of his own family, because he knew those hard times. He knew those tough times. He knew that those rough times and those times of struggle would make David a better king, because he knew David would respond in a godly manner. Someone once said life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to what happens to you. God threw those things at David. He threw that seclusion. He threw the routine. He threw that adversity at David because he knew David would turn around and use it to make him the king that God wanted him to be. I love seeing God work in our lives, but sometimes it's scary, isn't it? You got to watch what you ask for. God, build in me. God, build me to what you want me to be. You better be ready. Because God's way of building sometimes isn't our way of building, right? Sometimes you got to tear something down before you can build it back. And sometimes that's what God does. But I want you to look at the outcome of what God knew David was. Look at verse 18. It said, "Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite. He's cunning and playing." That means he was faithful to what he did. He took serious, even playing the harp, he was faithful to it. He practiced. A man, a mighty, valiant man. A strong man, both physically and spiritually. A man of war. A wise man. He was prudent in matters. You know what that phrase could actually say and speak more to us? David knew when to speak and when to listen. Do that again, Tony. David knew when to speak and when to listen. He was prudent in matters. He was a comely man, a striking man. That refers to his physical appearance. In other words, he presented himself well. He was the kind of person that you wanted to be around. God saw all of that, and God began to build off of that platform. Excuse me. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about how God chooses. Today, we talked about how God builds. It's God still working on you. I pray He is. I pray He works on each and every one of us, building us to where He wants us to be until the day He calls us home. Maybe you're here and you don't know Jesus Christ. But maybe He sees you. He has a plan for you. He's just waiting on you to give your life over to Him, to offer yourself to His lordship, where He can start the process of making you into what He would have you to be.